So a little bit of inside baseball here. I've had to re-record this video like a couple times because I keep calling the book The Shining based off of the Simpsons episode. So I'm going to try to get through it again and hopefully I won't make that mistake, but we'll see.
Boy, you read my thoughts. You've got the Shining.
You mean shining?
Shh, you wanna get sued?
So I struggle with dyslexia, and solely based off the length of some of King's books, I never managed to read a single one. But with the help of audiobooks, not sponsored by Audible, but I wish I could be, that changed over the Thanksgiving holiday when I completed The Shining. And let me tell you, this book was way different than I thought it would be. Hey there guys, what's up? Jared here, and if it's the first time you've ever been to my channel, welcome. This is a review channel for mediums like books, manga, and at times like their on-screen adaptation. And while I won't be talking about the movie today, because as of writing this script, I haven't seen a complete screening of The Shining, I am super excited to get to talk about the book. The Shining at its core is a story about madness, family, and the crushing weight of addiction and isolation, a supernatural, psychological horror that unravels in the confines of the Overlook Hotel, a haunted, living nightmare of a place. The Shining, and by extension King, really demonstrates his mastery of the slow burn effect of tension and suspense in this book. But first, let's talk about what The Shining is about. And in the book, we follow three main characters. We follow Jack Torrance, a struggling writer, relatable, and a recovering alcoholic, not relatable, who takes a job as the winter caretaker of the isolated Overlook Hotel after being dismissed from his position as a teacher at some posh private school in Vermont for beating a child. Also not relatable. And to put it nicely, he's not exactly the easiest character to root for, but with Jack also comes his wife Wendy, who credit for loyalty if nothing else, I guess, and their son Danny, who has the power that gives the book its name, The Shining. Now, from what I understand, The Shining is actually King's power system, if you'll give it, throughout his entirety of his books. From what I understand, the Losers Club from It can shine, as well as Carrie from, Carrie. But I think the easiest way to describe it is as a, psychic power that can manifest itself in different ways. For example, Carrie can make things move and explode with her mind, whereas Danny is more of a telepath and is capable of sending messages back in time, able to read thoughts and communicate with others over distance. And that is kind of the driving force of the tension in this story. You see, for reasons that may be explained in the Dr. Sleep book, which I think is a direct sequel to The Shining, the Overlook Hotel is a monstrous entity that enjoys killing people, primarily people with The Shining, and this of course puts Danny at risk, though it is the way the hotel goes about this directive that is chilling. As seeing the struggle and pain in Jack's life, the hotel actively works to manipulate Jack into being the one who lands the killing blow on his son and his wife. And the rest of the story centers around this growing tension and works to answer the sadistic question of what happens when a fresh start turns into a waking nightmare, as the Torrance family spirals into madness and terror. And this spiral is helped tremendously by King's writing. Without being overly wordy or hyper-poetic, King paints a very vivid description of the horrors unraveling within the Overlook, and the key aspect of this hotel is that it is a haunted entity, and in the way things groan, or the way the hedge animals moves, or the way King writes how Danny sees things, it all serves to make the hotel feel very much alive. In fact, in many ways, the second half of this book makes you feel like the Torrance family are these caged birds, and the hotel is this cage closing in on them. Slowly at first, and then collapsing all at once. And the only time I ever really had trouble following the prose is when Jack is having his mental breakdowns, and it's a little bit sporadic, but I think that was kind of the point, so I'm gonna give it a pass. King also had to balance on a thin tightrope when writing The Shining, like most psychological and supernatural thrillers do, especially in how they present information. The question of, is the hotel haunted or is Jack just insane, needs to be constantly battling in your head as you read until you pull back the curtain and reveal the truth. And I think King did that really well with both Jack and Danny. Because Jack is struggling with alcoholism and he's stressed beyond belief, and it constantly shows how unstable his mind is and it damages his credibility. But yet he's also there for a lot of the exposition dumps about the hotel's history that would lead a rational mind to believe there is something wrong with the place. And so we're constantly battling is Jack just insane, or is the hotel actually up to something bad? On the other hand, when Danny sees things like a fire hose turning into a snake, is that just an overactive imagination of a child? Or is this really happening due to Danny's shine? King's choice to use inherently unstable characters to tell this type of story is perfect, because if we had seen most of the book through Wendy's perspective, who has issues of her own, and we'll get to those in a bit, but she seems for the most part to be rational, it probably would have been less effective in building the horror. And since we named them all again, let's talk about this trio and of course Dick Halloran, who is also kind of important to this book. And let's start with Jack because I have some thoughts. I actually think that as a character, Jack is probably the most complex in the book and by far the one that King spends the most time on. And King doesn't just tell us like Jack Torrance is unraveling, he makes us feel it. Like through Jack's thoughts, we experience his descent into madness firsthand. It's very raw, it's very visceral, and it's terrifying because it's so human. And the balance King writes between Jack's personal struggles, his alcoholism, his failures as a father and a husband, and the Overlook's manipulative influence is all excellent. There's only one problem, and that's I never felt like he was a super redeemable person to begin with. And it could be argued that King worked really hard not to present Jack as a monster at the start, but to me the ship sailed by the end of part 1 because while I was stressed for Danny and Wendy's sake, I never really cared that much about Jack making it out of the Overlook on time. And look, maybe it's a product of the time, because Jack treating Wendy so horribly, him physically unable to control himself, leading to injuries of both his son and that kid at the school, all of that just left me with this permanently bad taste in his mouth as a Gen Z reader. And I just couldn't find it in me to want to redeem him. And so moving from Jack, let's talk about Wendy, and unfortunately, there isn't that much to say about her. Of all the characters in the story, Wendy felt the most flat to me. She has good qualities. I mean, the love and protective nature she has for her son is admirable. And I guess there's some depth when it comes to her jealousy over Jack and Danny's relationship, but overall she felt sort of one note, and in some ways contradictory to how she was portrayed throughout the novel. At times she's portrayed as very passive and dependent on Jack, and the next scene she's resourceful and insanely courageous, even wielding a knife and not hesitating to kill, and it kind of gave me some writing whiplash. And I was like, is this the same Wendy we were reading about in the earlier parts? Because I don't know how this happened. Now, as for Danny, I think he was written as well as he could be. I think that writing a 5-year-old that has to understand complex thoughts, but also has to have this childlike innocence regarding what is going on is pretty hard to do. And while there were times where I literally put down the book as Danny was describing something and thought to myself, what kind of 5-year-old thinks like this? For the most part, I really like the chapters and Danny's perspectives. We see most of the action and chapter from his perspective, him and Dick's, and him being so relatively small and helpless as these events unfold only serves to heighten the tension that takes place in the Overlook, and his reaction specifically to the horror aspects, the body in the bathtub of room 217, really just amplifies everything about what makes the Overlook scary. And while Dick Halloran isn't exactly a mainstay of the book, appearing only with relevance in parts 1 and 5 of the book, he's great. I don't really have much to say about him other than I loved his vibe and the way he cares so deeply for Danny. Lee's level of empathy, likely due to his realization of his shining abilities, is just awesome, and I love the risks he's willing to take throughout the book to save one boy he met once. He isn't explored in a ton of depth, but from what I was able to see, he was enjoyable to follow, and his chapters were extremely suspenseful, which of course helps a lot in terms of the likability of a character. I think that King went into this book wanting to explore this idea of addiction and madness, and how the horrors of addiction bleed into so many aspects of a person's life. And for the most part, I think he nailed that. Part of me wonders what inspired King to explore that angle. Well, I can't say I thought Jack Torrance was extremely redeemable. I can say that King did effectively make me feel bad for him as we watch his world collapse around him. There's a certain sadness to seeing a man try so hard to improve only to collapse under the temptation of something beyond his control, like the Overlook. But I feel like I've been talking for a while, so what I'll do to close out is I'll do a quick list of what I liked, what I didn't like, and then leave it there. So again, I think King made a conscious choice in which characters he chose to explore, and those characters, I think he characterized them extremely well. Danny and Jack are standouts, but on the other hand, Wendy was a victim to not being selected for further characterization. Additionally, the Overlook as an entity was a phenomenal villain, and while I wish I could have learned more about the hotel's history in a creative way, rather than an info dump via a mysteriously appearing scrapbook, King did a fantastic job in making the hotel feel both alive and horrific. And the final praise I can give is the slow burn aspect of this book and the incredible tension that it builds. I've heard that King is a master of the slow burn tension technique, and while this is my first King novel, I can believe that. The only issue I had on part of the pacing was in part 1, where I felt it was a bit too slow for me, but once we arrived at the hotel, I was very intrigued. The last thing I wanted to say is that I wish this book could have delivered some more closure for me. Yes, we got an epilogue, but the final chapter felt a bit too chaotic and disorganized as a wrap-up, and even the epilogue wasn't as thorough as I'd hope it would have been. But perhaps King knew that he wanted to do a sequel and chose to leave it more open-ended, and maybe that opinion of mine will change when I read Dr. Sleep. But overall, I really enjoyed The Shining, and if somehow you haven't read it yet despite being a fan of the horror genre, I'd really encourage you to pick it up, especially if you're a fan of the slow burn style of writing. Also, if you enjoyed this review, it would mean a ton if you could leave this video a like and subscribe to the channel on my quest to hit 1,000 subscribers. I'd also really appreciate if you could follow me on Twitter, and if you like my gaming content, I've moved that over to Twitch just so people who come to my channel for this type of content aren't flooded by me doing live streams of Pokemon Luminescent Platinum, but I'm still doing that. Again, I just moved over to Twitch. And with that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and until next time, peace.